One of our favorite activities over the course of quarantine has been watching these squirrels mess up our feeders. But one of my other favorite activities is doing this. Scare them off. All right, so hope you're having a good day. Today is beautiful. This guy's still hanging out. Today is a beautiful day, and we are talking about the gospel. All right, so last week we talked about the balance between faith and action. We talked about how it's not enough to just believe the right thing, but we must do the right thing as well. And I want to be clear about something. We cannot earn our salvation. We cannot earn our favor with God. Nothing that we can do can make our relationship with Him right. The action is an overflow of belief. But there are things that highlighted Jesus' ministry, highlighted or themes in the rest of the Bible that Christians must do in order to, or in response to that belief or that salvation that they find through Christ. Jesus, right after he is tempted in the desert and he begins his ministry, the first thing that he does is call his disciples, right? And when he calls them, he finds them by the sea and he says, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Their response was pretty starking or staggering, is that they dropped their nets immediately. They left their livelihoods behind and they followed Jesus, right? They had this belief in who he was and they took action. And we have to take action as well. We have this whole city. This is Junction City. Your city might look different if you're from somewhere else and watching this, but we have this whole city and it's full of people who don't have this message, that don't have this relationship with Jesus, this eternal salvation that we get to experience. And as Christians, we have to be fishers of men. But in order to do that, we have to understand how to articulate, how to communicate the gospel. And so we're gonna flip over to an overhead view, and I'm gonna show you a simple framework for explaining the gospel and for thinking about how to share the gospel. All right, we all live in a world that is defined by brokenness. Brokenness can be seen in wars and in famine and disease, but it can also be seen in rage and deceitfulness and even pride. But what we have to understand is that God's plan was for these things to never be a part of it. God had a perfect design. So how did we get from here to here? Well, that is through something that the Bible calls sin. Sin is going outside of God's perfect design and pursuing our brokenness. This brokenness leads to death, and that death in our brokenness leads to separation from God. Now, people try to escape this brokenness all of the time through hobbies or money or success or drugs and alcohol or even education. But God has made a way out of that brokenness, one way, and that is through Jesus. Jesus was God, and he came down and lived as a man. He lived a perfect life, was killed on a cross, and then was raised on the third day, creating this way for those who turn from their sin and believe in him, and through that they might grow towards God's perfect design. The good news is it doesn't end there, because we get to go and help others do the same. All right, so I hope that illustration was helpful for you And to be honest with you, we're not going to get too in depth with this video. That is not the point of this video. The point of this video is to keep it simple. But there are two things that I hope you take away from this video and how this might be helpful for you. The first one is that you might explicitly use that illustration within itself. You might sit down with someone, you might be able to write that down for them and easily explain what the gospel is and even maybe answer some questions as to what it isn't. You could even verbalize it in that same respects, right? The world's broken. God didn't mean it to be that way. He sent Jesus that if we turn from our sin and believe in him, we can have right relationship with him, and our job is not just to stay there, but to help create a bridge for other people to get there as well. So, right, that would be the gospel in like 30 seconds if you needed a quick way to share it. But the more important, I shouldn't say more important, but what I really hope you take away from this is a basic framework for how to get to Jesus in a conversation. Right? When I first took Kevin out shed hunting, we started having different conversations, and somehow we got to talking about politics, right? And when that came up, it became very easy to bridge that gap to Jesus because of just a basic understanding of the gospel, right? A lot of politics is centered around morality, or at least it's easy to steer the conversation that way. And so once that came up, I started asking certain questions, made comments about my faith in Jesus, and then was able to have a brief explanation as to what the gospel is and what the gospel isn't, right? And so you might be able to do the same thing by having a basic understanding of what the gospel is and what the gospel isn't. And honestly, it might be able to affect how you have conversations with coworkers, with friends, or even just people that you have the opportunity to share Jesus with. Again, I know it's scary to talk about these things, but I hope making it simple like this might make it a little bit easier for you, and maybe even give you some clarity on what the gospel is by making it that simple. Love you guys. Grace and peace.